Sparta and North Korea, the balance of freedom and control. Hello, dear listeners. Today, I want to tell you two very special stories. One is a story that took place in a small city-state on the Greek Peninsula 2,500 years ago, and the other is a reality that is happening right now in the northern part of the Korean Peninsula. Ancient Sparta and modern North Korea. Although there is a gap of more than 2,000 years in time, these two societies show remarkably similar characteristics. Both thoroughly suppressed individual freedom while pursuing powerful military strength. Spartans became property of the state from the moment they were born. At age 7, they were separated from their parents and thrown into the harsh military education system called Agoge. Individual dreams or hopes were unimportant. The only goal was to become perfect warriors for the state. North Korea also prioritizes the system over individuals. From the moment of birth, people are classified into classes called songbun and must live within those boundaries for life. Free thinking or creative expression is immediately considered rebellion against the system. But, dear listeners, are these extreme cases distant stories unrelated to us? Not at all. We who live in modern times also spend every day in the dilemma of control and freedom, large and small. Workplace surveillance systems, social media algorithms, credit score systems, and even the self-censorship we impose on ourselves. We may not be as extreme as Spartans or North Korean residents, but we still live under invisible control. This audiobook is a practical guide on how to find balance in such reality, how to pursue true freedom while not losing social stability. We must learn the limits of extreme control through Sparta's downfall and North Korea's reality, while also recognizing the dangers of chaos that complete laissez-faire can bring. Chapter 1. Individual freedom versus collective safety. The eternal dilemma. Now let's begin our journey in earnest. The first topic we'll explore is the eternal conflict between individual freedom and collective safety. Sparta solved this dilemma in an extreme way. They chose to completely give up individual freedom in favor of maximizing collective safety. What was the result? In the short term, it was successful. The Spartan army boasted the most powerful military force in the Greek world and left a lasting mark in history with their heroic defense at the Battle of Thermopylae during the Persian Wars. But what happened in the long term? Sparta eventually declined. In a society where individual creativity and innovation were suppressed, sustainable development was impossible. In contrast, Athens guaranteed individual freedom relatively while developing democracy, resulting in brilliant civilizations flourishing in all fields, including philosophy, art, and science. What choices are we making in modern society? During the COVID-19 pandemic, we experienced this dilemma very concretely. Is it justified to restrict individual freedom of movement, mandate mask wearing, and issue gathering prohibitions? Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, it's interesting that some of those who usually claim to value freedom most were among the most active supporters of these control measures. It was an ironic situation where liberals defended restrictions on freedom. Psychologically speaking, humans have both safety needs and autonomy needs. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, if safety needs are not met, it's difficult to pursue higher order needs like self-actualization. But paradoxically, pursuing only safety can also deprive opportunities for self-actualization. Think about the realistic situations we face: security cameras at work, monitoring programs installed on company computers, entry record systems, etc. All of these are introduced under the justification of security and efficiency, but they simultaneously restrict personal privacy and autonomy. So what should we do? First, we must adhere to the principle of transparency. Even if any control or restriction is imposed, its purpose, scope, and duration must be clearly disclosed. Everything cannot be treated as state secrets like in Sparta or North Korea. Second, we must apply the principle of proportionality. The degree of restriction should be determined in proportion to the size of the risk, and excessive control should be avoided. Third, we must maintain the principle of time limits. All restrictive measures should have clear termination conditions and should not be transformed into permanent control. Finally, we must guarantee the principle of participation. The opinions of those affected should be sufficiently reflected in decisions that restrict individual freedom. Chapter 2: Invisible Control Systems in Modern Society. Sparta's control was direct and explicit. Rules such as eating black soup, using iron coins, and prohibiting contact with foreigners were codified in law. North Korea is similar. What actions are prohibited and what thoughts are not allowed are relatively clear. However, control in modern liberal democratic societies is much more sophisticated and covert. It operates in the form of what Michel Foucault called disciplinary power. It's like a panopticon system that gives the feeling of always being watched even though the watcher is invisible. Let me give you an example. Think about when you shop online. Every click, every search term, every moment you linger is recorded. This data is used to analyze your preferences and provide customized advertisements. On the surface, it's for the benevolent purpose of improving convenience. But in reality, it becomes a powerful tool for manipulating and controlling your consumption patterns. The credit score system is similar. Your financial transactions, tax records, and even social media activities are scored and managed. If this score is low, it's difficult to get loans, and it can even affect employment or housing. China's social credit system is an extreme development of this, where all individual actions are scored to determine social benefits or sanctions. Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, we think of ourselves as free individuals while only watching videos recommended by algorithms, only communicating with friends chosen by algorithms, and only buying products suggested by algorithms. Is this really freedom, or is it a more sophisticated form of control? The nudge concept presented by behavioral economists Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein is also noteworthy. It's a method of inducing behavior in the desired direction by adjusting the structure of choices instead of coercive commands. For example, placing healthy food in visible places in employee cafeterias and putting high-calorie food in corners. This soft paternalism appears to guarantee individual choice rights on the surface, but actually intentionally induces specific results. Compared to Sparta's direct coercion, it's much more humane, but it's also harder to resist. So how can we maintain true autonomy in such an environment? First, we need a shift in awareness. We must break free from the illusion that we are making completely free choices. We must acknowledge that some form of structural influence operates in every choice situation. Second, it's important to develop metacognitive abilities. We must continuously reflect on why we make certain choices and what external factors influence our judgment. Third, we need intentional pursuit of diversity. We should consciously expose ourselves to content that algorithms don't recommend and read articles from perspectives we don't agree with. Fourth, we must regularly implement digital detox. We need time for analog thinking and experiences by temporarily stepping away from the online world. Chapter 3: The Boundary Between Education and Indoctrination. Sparta's Agoge system is one of the most extreme cases in educational history. 7-year-old children were separated from their parents and subjected to 20 years of thorough military training. Individual preferences or talents were not considered at all. The goal was only to create the type of human the state wanted: perfect warriors. North Korea's education system is similar. Ideology education centered on leader worship permeates all subjects, and critical thinking or creative ideas are thoroughly suppressed. Students only memorize and repeat predetermined answers, never learning to question or doubt on their own. But here we must ask an uncomfortable question. How different is the modern public education system from these extreme cases? Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, our school system is still based on the factory model of the 19th century Industrial Revolution. Attending at fixed times, gathering children of the same age in one place, and uniformly injecting standardized curricula. Educator Ken Robinson criticized that the current education system kills creativity. Children are trained to solve only problems with correct answers, become afraid of making mistakes, and eventually lose their ability for original thinking. Even in private schools or specialized schools that are considered to provide good education, the situation is not much different. Only a single path to success, higher scores, better universities, more stable jobs, is presented, and choices outside this are considered failure. University education is similar, specialized majors by department, one-way lectures by professors, memorization-focused evaluation methods. All of this turns students into passive knowledge consumers. So what is the difference between true education and indoctrination? True education teaches questions, but indoctrination forces answers. Education encourages critical thinking, but indoctrination demands blind acceptance. Education recognizes diversity, but indoctrination pursues uniformity. From a neuroscience perspective, the human brain continues to develop until age 25. Particularly, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for judgment and abstract thinking, and the influence of education received before this part's development is complete, can last a lifetime. Therefore, we can see how important childhood education is. Philosopher John Dewey emphasized learning through experience. He believed that true education is not simply being injected with knowledge, but learning through direct experience and experimentation. This is the opposite approach from Sparta's mechanical training, or North Korea's indoctrination education. What can we realistically do? First, we must cultivate the habit of questioning in children and students. It's important to ask, "Why do you think so?" rather than, "This is the correct answer." Second, we must create an environment where failure is not feared. Creative thinking is suppressed in an atmosphere where wrong answers are criticized. Third, we must provide opportunities to encounter diverse perspectives. Biased thinking inevitably forms with only one textbook and one viewpoint. Fourth, we must recognize the importance of individualized education. Not all children learn at the same pace and in the same way. Finally, it's important to cultivate an attitude of lifelong learning. Learning doesn't end when you graduate from school. You need an attitude of continuously learning new things and questioning existing knowledge. Chapter 4: Economic Freedom and Social Stability. Sparta's economy was based on self-sufficient agriculture, but the actual agricultural labor was handled by helots, or slaves. Spartan citizens could focus only on military training and war. Commerce and handicrafts were thoroughly prohibited, and they used iron-made currency to fundamentally block wealth accumulation. North Korea's economy is a state-led planned economy. All means of production are nationalized, and individual economic activities are extremely limited. Recently, black markets called jangmadang have become active, but they still remain in a grey area that is not officially recognized. What do these two cases show? Economic freedom can achieve social equality in the short term when suppressed, but in the long term, the driving force of innovation and growth is lost. But on the other hand, a completely free market also has problems. The 2008 financial crisis increasingly severe income inequality, and environmental destruction are all side effects of unregulated capitalism. Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, it's interesting that those who most strongly advocate for economic freedom are mostly the privileged class who have already accumulated sufficient wealth. Forcing free competition on poor people is like telling someone who can't swim to jump into water. Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz argued in his book, The Price of Inequality, that extreme inequality hinders economic growth for society as a whole. When wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, consumption capacity decreases, which eventually leads to overall economic slowdown. On the other hand, liberal economists like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman believed in the market's autonomous adjustment ability. They believed that the most efficient resource allocation occurs when government intervention is minimized. So what balance should we realistically find? First, basic survival rights must be guaranteed. No matter how free the competition, it cannot be called true freedom without a minimum safety net. The flexicurity model of Nordic countries is a good example. It guarantees employment flexibility while maintaining a thick social security system for the unemployed. Second, equality of opportunity must be guaranteed. If starting lines are different, fair competition is impossible. Equal educational opportunities, startup support, and expansion of social mobility are needed. Third, transparent and fair rules must be established. Institutional devices are needed to ensure that market participants can compete under the same conditions. What strategies should we take at the individual level? Acquiring financial knowledge is essential. We must understand the principle of compound interest, the importance of risk diversification, and the impact of inflation. As Warren Buffett said, if you don't learn how to make money work for you, you'll have to work for money your whole life. Also, developing diverse income sources is important. Relying on only one job is risky. Income sources must be diversified through side jobs, investments, and entrepreneurship. Finally, rational adjustment of consumption patterns is necessary. We must avoid conspicuous consumption or impulsive purchases and establish spending plans that fit long-term goals. Chapter 5. Information, Freedom and Filter Bubbles. Sparta thoroughly blocked contact with the outside world. They prohibited cultural exchanges with other Greek city-states and didn't even allow travel. This was to prevent Spartans from being exposed to various external ideas or lifestyles and questioning the current system. North Korea's information control is even more extreme. Not only the internet, but also listening to foreign broadcasts and possessing foreign books are punished as serious crimes. Only a limited intranet called Kwangmyong is allowed, and all information is strictly censored by the state. But how free are we who live in the digital age of the 21st century? On the surface, we seem to have access to infinite information. But in reality, we may be trapped in a new form of information prison called filter bubbles. The filter bubble, named by Eli Pariser, refers to the phenomenon where algorithms analyze individuals' past search records and click patterns to selectively provide only information of similar tendencies. As a result, users only encounter information that reinforces their existing beliefs and prejudices, and other perspectives gradually become distant. Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, we think we get information for free, but we're actually paying with our personal information and interests. Like the saying, "There's no free lunch," platforms like Google, Facebook, and YouTube are making us into products and selling us to advertisers. Psychologically speaking, humans have a cognitive bias called confirmation bias. There's a tendency to easily accept information that matches existing beliefs, but to ignore or distort information that contradicts them. Algorithms cleverly exploit this human weakness. A more serious problem is the echo chamber phenomenon. When only people with the same thoughts communicate with each other, extreme views become even more reinforced. Political polarization, the spread of fake news, and the spread of conspiracy theories are all related to this. So how can we enjoy true information freedom in this situation? First, we must consciously utilize diverse information sources. Don't rely on just one or two news sites or social media platforms, but encounter media from various perspectives. Second, it's important to cultivate the habit of fact-checking. We must develop critical thinking skills to verify information sources and compare and review multiple materials. Third, efforts are needed to intentionally neutralize the personalization functions of algorithms. Sometimes we should search in incognito mode or try experiments to find information from other people's perspectives. Fourth, we must rediscover the importance of offline reading. Books are independent information spaces, unaffected by algorithms. Particularly, we can develop deep thinking through classics or academic books. Finally, we must create opportunities for active discussion and dialogue. We should make efforts to understand each other's perspectives by directly talking with people who have different opinions. Chapter 6: Self-Development and Self-Censorship. In Spartan society, individual self-realization or expression of individuality was thoroughly prohibited. All citizens had to receive the same training and pursue the same goals. Creative activities like art or philosophy were considered luxury and expressions of weakness. Interestingly, similar uniformity appears in modern self-development culture. 7 Habits of Successful People, How Rich People Think, 5 Laws That Change Life, etc. It's as if everyone can succeed by following the same formula. Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, the self-development industry is a huge business that grows by feeding on people's anxiety and feelings of inferiority. It continuously injects the message, "You are insufficient as you are," to induce consumption. What's more problematic is the internalization of self-censorship. We hide our true thoughts or feelings by being conscious of others' gazes. Examples include editing social media posts multiple times and selectively sharing only images that others might like. Psychologist Carl Jung presented the concepts of persona and shadow. Persona is the socially acceptable appearance of the self, and shadow is the suppressed and hidden dark side of the self. For healthy personality development, a process of acknowledging and integrating the shadow is necessary, but excessive self-censorship hinders this. From a neuroscience perspective, constant self-censorship increases the secretion of cortisol, a stress hormone. This weakens the immune system, suppresses creative thinking, and increases the risk of depression. So what's the difference between true self-development and self-censorship? True self-development starts from internal motivation. It should be based on one's own values and goals, not comparison with others or external standards. In contrast, self-censorship results from excessively being conscious of external gazes and evaluations. Also, true self-development includes the process of acknowledging and accepting failures and weaknesses. It's not about trying to become a perfect person, but about loving one's imperfect self while continuing to grow. What can we realistically do? First, we must establish our own success criteria. Don't blindly follow society's predetermined success formulas, but reflect on what values are truly important to you. Second, we must implement regular digital detox. It's important to have your own time away from the constant comparisons and evaluations of social media. Third, we must change our perspective on failure. Don't regard failure as shameful, but accept it as an opportunity for growth. Fourth, we must find true friends or mentors, people who see the essence rather than appearances and can give critical but constructive feedback. Finally, we must regularly have time for self-reflection. In busy daily life, it's easy to forget what we really want. Chapter 7. Surveillance Society in the Social Media Age. The surveillance society of Big Brother, described in George Orwell's novel 1984, has become reality. The difference from expectations is that the government didn't forcibly install surveillance devices, but we voluntarily carry surveillance tools in our palms. Smartphones record our location, search history, call records, message content, and even steps and heart rate in real time. On social media, we voluntarily expose personal information and make public our human relationships, preferences, and even political orientations. In Sparta, secret police called Krypteia monitored the helots. In North Korea, organizations called people's groups make residents monitor each other. But in modern society, we have become both watchers and watched. Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, we worry about privacy invasion while willingly disclosing personal information to get a few more likes. This is like being locked in prison while reaching out through bars to receive applause. Harvard Business School professor Shoshana Zuboff presented the concept of surveillance capitalism. It refers to a new form of capitalist system that collects and analyzes personal data to predict and manipulate behavior. Our interests and desires themselves become commoditized and traded. Psychologically speaking, social media causes dopamine addiction. Every time we receive likes or comments, dopamine is released in the brain, creating pleasure, which creates a vicious cycle of posting more content. Also, according to social comparison theory, humans instinctively try to compare themselves with others. Social media maximizes this comparison, increasing anxiety and depression. So how can we protect ourselves in such an environment? First, we must practice digital minimalism. Keep only necessary apps and delete the rest, minimizing notification functions. Second, we must strengthen personal information protection settings. Check social media privacy settings and reduce unnecessary information sharing. Third, we must create conscious offline time. We need time to completely turn off digital devices and read books, take walks, or meet people and have direct conversations. Fourth, it's important to develop critical media literacy. We must recognize that information encountered on social media is not always true and may be edited and manipulated. Finally, we must invest more time in genuine human relationships. We should find emotional stability through deep offline relationships rather than superficial online relationships. Chapter 8. True Strength and Inner Freedom. Sparta defined strength only as resistance to external enemies. Being able to wear heavier armor, fight longer, and endure more pain was all there was to strength. But as a result of pursuing only this external strength, Sparta eventually collapsed due to internal rigidity and lack of creativity. North Korea is similar. They boast a strong military armed with nuclear weapons and missiles, but internally suffer from extreme poverty and oppression. They appear strong externally, but are very vulnerable internally. So what is true strength? Ancient Greek philosophers saw arete, or virtue, as true strength. The ability to maintain inner peace while not yielding to external pressure. Epictetus, the founder of Stoic philosophy, was of slave origin, but had a freer spirit than anyone. He said, "Distinguishing between what we can control and what we cannot control is the beginning of wisdom." Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, modern society defines strength criteria all by external things such as the amount of money, the height of social status, and the beauty of appearance. True inner strength is often ignored because it's difficult to measure and hard to Instagram. Psychologist Viktor Frankl wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, based on his experience in Nazi concentration camps. He said that even in extreme situations, the last thing humans cannot give up is the freedom to choose meaning. No matter how controlled the external environment is, how to interpret that situation and give it meaning is an individual choice. From a neuroscience perspective, what's related to inner freedom is executive function, the ability to suppress impulses, set goals, and execute plans. This is related to prefrontal cortex activity and can be strengthened through meditation or exercise. So how can we cultivate inner freedom in daily life? First, it's important to develop self-awareness abilities. We must develop metacognitive abilities to objectively observe our emotions, thoughts, and behavioral patterns. Second, clarification of values is necessary. We must establish clear criteria for what is truly important and what kind of life we want to live. Third, it's important to develop emotional regulation abilities. We need the ability to judge situations coolly without being swept away by negative emotions like anger or anxiety. Fourth, we must maintain an attitude of continuous learning and growth. We must not be trapped in fixed mindsets, but continue to develop through new experiences and knowledge. Finally, the ability to form healthy relationships with others is important. True strength is not solving everything alone, but building networks where we can ask for help when needed and rely on each other. Chapter 9. The Wisdom of Balance, the Path of Moderation. Aristotle emphasized the importance of the golden mean in Nicomachean Ethics. Courage is the midpoint between cowardice and recklessness, and generosity is the balance point between stinginess and waste. This applies directly to the issue of freedom and control. Sparta and North Korea are examples that extremely leaned toward control. Conversely, complete laissez-faire can also be problematic. As shown by 1960s hippie culture and some anarchist movements, rejecting all rules and constraints can eventually lead to chaos and disorder. The Eastern philosophy of moderation also contains similar wisdom. Avoiding extremes and finding appropriate balance points is a wise way of life. Here, adding a slightly cynical perspective, modern society tends to prefer extremes. On social media, the more provocative and extreme the claims, the more attention they receive, and in politics, factional logic gets clearer support than moderate positions. Moderation is easily regarded as boring and uninteresting. But from the perspective of complexity theory, the most stable and sustainable systems are located near the critical point, where appropriate levels of change and stability coexist. If too rigid, they become vulnerable to external shocks. If too fluid, they lose consistency. Finding balance in real life is never easy. We must find appropriate balance points among numerous conflicting elements such as work and rest, personal time and social obligations, present pleasure and future goals, our own desires and others' needs. So how can we find such balance? First, situational thinking is necessary. Don't try to apply the same principles to all situations, but respond flexibly according to context. Second, we must maintain a long-term perspective. We should make choices considering long-term results, rather than immediate convenience or instant satisfaction. Third, continuous feedback and adjustment are necessary. A balance point decided once is not valid forever. When situations change, balance points must also be adjusted. Fourth, an attitude of listening to others' opinions is important. Since judgment based only on oneself can be biased, we should seek advice from various perspectives. Finally, we must acknowledge that perfect balance is impossible. Sometimes there are situations where we have no choice but to lean to one side, and that's also part of life. Conclusion: living as a free soul. So far, we have examined the issue of freedom and control through two extreme cases, Sparta and North Korea, and we confirmed that we who live in modern times also live in dilemmas of control and freedom, large and small. What's important is that we don't need to view this reality only pessimistically. Human history has ultimately been a continuous journey toward more freedom and a better life. The development from feudalism to democracy, from class systems to equality, from ignorance to enlightenment, is evidence of this. Of course, the process hasn't been smooth. Sometimes there have been retreats, and new forms of oppression have emerged. But the overall direction is clearly toward progress. What is the task given to us as individuals? It's to pioneer our own free lives within this great flow. Everyone remember, true freedom is not the right to do anything. It's the ability to choose what is right. Spartans were forcibly deprived of choice, and North Korean residents are still in such situations. But we still have room for choice. What job to have, who to form relationships with, what values to pursue, what dreams to move toward. All these choices create our lives. Of course, choices come with responsibilities. Being able to make free choices means we must also take responsibility for the results. Sometimes, this sense of responsibility feels burdensome, and we might wish someone else would make decisions for us. But don't succumb to such temptation. The Bible says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. True freedom can be obtained when we escape from ignorance and indifference to pursue truth. Also, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. 2 Corinthians 9:7. True choice must come from inner conviction, not external pressure or coercion. Finally, we must also remember the words of 1 Corinthians 7:23. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of human beings. We must not become slaves to any human or system. We must live as free personalities before God. Everyone, thank you sincerely for listening to this audiobook to the end. I hope the stories I've shared have been even a small help in your lives. If you want more wisdom and insights, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. I want to continue the journey toward a better life together with you in the future. I earnestly pray that everyone will enjoy true freedom and live meaningful lives. Thank you.